listening to African Father in America podcast by Simon Javanokelo, live from Seattle, Washington, USA.
Thank you so much for joining me for another incredible episode of the African Father in America podcast. This is episode number 299. Tomorrow we are reaching 300 episodes, and I really have a special guest here with me today. I have my wonderful brother Christopher Townsend, who is an associate professor. So I should be calling you Dr. Christopher Townsend. And and Chris is also the interim director at the African Studies program at the University of Washington. Go ahead and say hi before we begin the program, please.
Hello, Simon. Thank you so much for having me. It is awesome to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I am excited for us to talk about today's proverb, which is from Cameroon, and it says that rain does not fall on one roof alone. That is going to be the center of our conversation today. We are live streaming on two platforms. We are live streaming on Clubhouse, which is a social audio platform. So there are people who are driving, who are listening to our conversation, and we are also live streaming on YouTube. So there are people who are literally sitting in their living rooms from across the world, joining us for the show today. So thank you. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you are on Clubhouse, make sure you are engaging and sharing the link to this conversation. And if you're going to listen later on, especially on Apple, where we just became a 5-star rated podcast, I urge you to subscribe and rate the African Father in America podcast over there. So I want to begin the show with the 3 nuggets of wisdom that my team and I prepared for you today, that were inspired by this amazing proverb from Cameroon. Again, the proverb says that rain does not fall on one roof alone. Now, the first nugget of wisdom says that you can't do everything on your own. The second nugget of wisdom says that when it rains, it pours. And then the third nugget of wisdom says that there's safety in numbers. So I want you to think about those, but I want to come straight to you, my brother Chris, so that you can also speak to this African proverb. For those who are meeting Chris for the first time, as I was researching, I discovered that you're actually an author of 2 incredible books, So later on, I'll ask you just to speak about them briefly. But you also specialize in South Sudanese. You did a lot of your work there in terms of your studies, and it's a part of the world that I'm passionate about because I lived and worked there for a while. And I want you to go ahead and take a stab at this proverb. Tell us what it is that came to your mind when you first received it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what it brought to my mind was actually a proverb from the book of Proverbs, or a teaching from the Judeo-Christian Bible, which says that rain falls on the just and the unjust. And so what this proverb makes me think is that, we are all subject to, or we are all equal, right? It doesn't matter whether you are rich or poor, whether your house is a 1-room shack or a many-roomed mansion, right? We are all subject to the vicissitudes of life, joy, pain, life, death, seasons of plenty, seasons of lack, right? And so we all need to make sure that our proverbial roofs are waterproof, right? What's the point of being in a huge mansion if you've got a leaky roof, right? And I would think that it's better to be in a small house with a clean sealed roof than in a big house with, a roof that leaks, right? So it makes me think about our equality under the eyes of God, regardless of our station in life.
That's so incredible. Yeah, I love that the book of Proverbs today aligns with African proverbs. You know, there's always there's always a question or a feeling when it comes to the Bible and African spirituality. And I saw something as I was looking at as I was researching today's episode and just looking at some of your work. It looks like you've done a lot of comparison between different cultures and the Bible. And I'm just happy that you're able to bring this comparison really quickly, but also, just demonstrate that, the book of Proverbs can be aligned with African proverbs sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. If you're just joining us, I'm here with our special guest for the day, Dr. Christopher Townsell, who is the interim director of the African Studies program at the University of Washington. And, I want you to subscribe if you haven't, if you're watching today's conversation on YouTube. And if you are on Clubhouse, I see Lavender, Brother Art, Lakeli, Roger. Thank you all for joining us. Make sure you share the link to the room, and just let us know where in the world you are joining us from. I see that Kay Benjamin is also on YouTube. Thank you so much. Nice to see you. Now, as we continue on with our conversation, there's this question that I ask all my guests, Dr. Townsend. I ask for each guest to share with us a childhood story that really inspired who you are today. And I normally share that when I was 8 years old, my mother gave me a bicycle, like a cargo bicycle for transporting milk and bread in our neighborhood. And that is what introduced me to entrepreneurship, and it's what introduced me to solving problems. Whenever I see a problem in the community, I come up with a solution. I don't look for aid, and I feel that, for you to rise to the level where you are, where you're now leading one of the most, incredible institutions in our region and really around the world. If you are in Kenya, you will find UW affiliated initiatives. For example, at the Kisumu District Hospital where my mother worked, next door to my mother's office was a UW sponsored research facility. So that's why before the show I was just saying I'm so proud of the work that you do, and also your team at the African Studies program, including I forget the name of the brother that connected us before this show. I'll remember before the end of the show, but you've helped us host some of some leaders from Africa, including Bobby Wine from Uganda. He's an opposition leader from Uganda. And I have also done a talk about the music of Somali in the 70s and 80s. And so what you're doing now is something that I can't just tell you how proud I am of you, but I'll let you speak about what is it that has brought you to this point? What is it that continues to drive you to date?
Sure. Yes. So thank you so much for that question. So I was born into a household of Christian faith. And as a child, when I was very young, I was diagnosed with a speech impediment. Sometimes it can display itself still. And so there would be times during my youth when I would be very discouraged. And so my mom, who is, just a rock, she actually opened up the Bible to the book of Exodus, right? And the story of Moses at the burning bush, and Moses being really hesitant about receiving his calling and saying, who am I? I'm slow of speech. And then God is like, who made your mouth? Now go. And so my mom basically introduced me to that story when I was very young to encourage me and just say, don't be down on yourself. You are who you are. God has great plans for you and you can do this, And so I think about that today, just in the dual sense that one, God has been faithful, right? unlike in the West, I think, where there's very much kind of like a me worldview. I am proud that my worldview is more of an African-based one, which really looks at, we, not me, and knowing that it took a lot of people outside of me to get me here, right? Teachers, family, organizations, schools, right? And so I've just been profoundly blessed by that. And I can look back at that moment in my youth, where my mom encouraged me as a real kind of um, launching pad into where I am today.
Yeah, that's incredible. Mothers do so much for their children, and you can tell the story of our mothers through their children, and so I just love what you shared with us. Now, I know that we're supposed to jump straight into some of the work that you're doing at the African Studies program at the UW, but I feel that we need to have 2 other episodes with you where we can just dive deep into your books, because your books are just so, they're timely. We need these books now, especially in this era of Black Panther 2, in this era of cancel culture, where what you say, you have to really be politically correct, otherwise you're going to be swept by the wave. So just speak briefly about your first book, Chosen Peoples, Christianity and Political Imagination in South Sudan. Just touch on why you wrote and worked on this project. And I also want you to speak just briefly about your second book, Bounds of Blackness, African American, Sudan, and the Politics of Solidarity.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my first book, I've always been really interested in the ways that people weave their religious identity into their political action, right? Of course, we've seen this in, we could say traumatic effect in the contemporary US, right? But I'm really interested in the ways in which Black peoples use their religion as an instrument of liberation from kind of state-sponsored oppression. And so the Sudan is this really interesting case, right, where you've got people who identify as Black, African, and Christian, and who see themselves as a kind of chosen people in the same genealogy, say, as the ancient Israelites, right, who were called out of the house of bondage in Egypt into their promised land, right? But in the Sudan, oftentimes the people who have been, I guess, identified as the oppressor have been other Africans, right? Northern Sudanese, Arabs, and Muslims, right? And so my book, Chosen Peoples, is not, a wholesale critique, right, of an entire people. And my project is not to demonize anyone, but it is to really kind of explore the ways in which people made the Bible and God real for them in their particular context, right? It's one thing to read in scripture that, God is great, but what does God's greatness mean in a colonized space, right? What does God's greatness mean within, an actual context of war, genocide, marginalization? And so these are the kinds of questions that book explores.
Incredible. Let's go to the second one. Your second book that speaks about it's called Bounds of Bounds of Blackness, African
Yes.
American, Sudan, and the Politics of Solidarity. Speak to that for a second.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that book. It should be coming out next year with Cornell University Press. And so, as an African American interested in the Sudan, I was really fascinated in my research for the first book by the ways in which African Americans kept showing up in the archive. You've got a South Sudanese person writing to Dr. King in 1960 asking for help. You've got Sudanese refugees, right, attending Black churches. You've got Sudan being talked about in very deep ways in African American newspapers going back to the 1950s, right? And so I'm just really interested in the ways in which African Americans are defining what it means to be Black across time by looking at the Sudan. And so it's called Bounds of Blackness because, there are ways in which what it means to be Black, right, is not a kind of solid, static thing, right? It changes over time, right? Being Black during the colonial period means something different from being Black during the post colonial, right? Being Black during Jim Crow, right? And being Black in the age of Obama, right? Might have certain similarities, but are not identical, right? And who gets to be Black, right? Who is included, who is excluded, who maintains those boundaries, right? And what are the consequences? I think these are really big questions for us to grapple with, particularly during this age of Black Lives Matter. And I really want to write a world history of the Sudan that is not confined to the political borders of the country, but to really center Sudan in our imagining of global Blackness and the global African diaspora.
So incredible. Well, my tribe, the Luo tribe, we
Yeah.
also migrated from the current Egypt actually to Sudan. And while I was working in Sudan, I had the privilege of actually riding a motorbike to the original place where my ancestors migrated from.
Wow.
Yeah, before they took the Nile southwards all the way to Lake Victoria where they settled. So I feel that we should just light a fire sometime and sit and talk and
Yeah.
really. So when is your book out? Your second book? When is it out?
Sure. So I'm actually finishing up the revisions now. And so, God willing, if I have those in by the end of January, the book will be in hand, right? That I can actually show to the world by this time next year. So it should be out in late 2023.
That's incredible. One of the things that fascinates me about your current role at the University of Washington, being the interim director of African Studies program, is that there are so many universities across the world that have African Studies program, and it's only the University of Washington and Seattle University locally that I have actually interacted with leaders in those programs, and I have an appreciation for what you do, at the University of Washington, a deep appreciation. But I just want you to step back a little from you being involved with UW and just speak to why is it important for us to have African studies programs at these global universities, especially big institutions like the University of Washington. Why is it important?
Absolutely. And outstanding question. Thank you for that. I think it is important because it is impossible to understand the world historically or contemporarily without centering Africa, right? If you look at a map today, you will note that the UK is at the top and the center, and that was very intentionally done during the colonial period. But I think that one can approach the world map today and choose to see or choose to focus on the centrality of Africa, right? Africa is at the center of the global economy, right? It is the demographic center of world Christianity now, right? It is the continent with the largest Muslim population, right? Um, it is a country that is booming with, or sorry, a continent, excuse me, that is booming with technology, right? Um, and so while so much of history has been written about Africa being on the receiving end of global forces, Africa has really been a prime agent, right? And so I think that it is imperative on every institution, right? Whether it is the University of Washington or a small liberal arts school or, whomever, right? To take a deep investment on the study of Africa and Africans, right? African people, right? Africa is not just, the pictures of savannas and elephants and giraffes and stuff. Yes, that they are real and deserve attention too, but right, Africans, the African people, African religions and cultures and languages and politics, right? We need to be paying attention, right? Um, Africa also, demographically speaking, is experiencing the world's largest population boom, right? And yet it is, demographically speaking, the world's youngest continent, right? I think that the average age on the continent as of a few years ago was just 18 years old, right? So those two numbers in conjunction mean that by the year, say 2050, right, Africans are going to be at the forefront of things that today we might not even imagine, right? We could have an African Pope, we could have an African UN Secretary General, right? And so that's just to say that every institution needs to center Africa because Africa is at the center of what is going on in the world today and historically.
Man, you just motivated me because I feel like I could be the next UN Secretary General or
Right,
something.
right, right, right. Exactly.
Anyway, when we also speak about the University of Washington, it's like a government in itself.
Sure,
I
sure.
was sharing with you before the show began, as we were preparing, that I used to see the University of Washington branding in Kisumu, Kenya, where I was, and later on I began seeing research programs that were being led and funded by the University of Washington in Kenya, in Kisumu, in very rural areas as well. But as I moved to Seattle, one of the jobs I had was actually at UW. I was a standardized patient at the University of Washington, where I was basically an actor. And I was working with medical students, physical therapy students, dentist students, and my job was to act as if I was suffering from illnesses from the region I came from, East Africa, Kenya, and I also, through this, I was able to get exposed to a different side of UW, the UW in Seattle, and then, as time went by, I began doing talks at the African Studies program at the University of Washington, and then what followed is that I got a job with one of the largest logistics companies in the world, and lo and behold, one of my clients and the clients of the company was the University of Washington.
Wow.
And I discovered that we were actually helping the University of Washington transport human remains, parts of human remains for research here in Seattle from Africa. So for example, the things I used to see, those were the ways that the UW could get samples that they needed to research on here in Seattle. So being exposed to this world is making me curious to what are some of the things that excite you about the African Studies program. What research are you guys doing about Africa now that is going to impact the Africa of the future that you're talking about? And talk to us about some of the work you're doing and what the era of your leadership is going to bring to African studies globally.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you so much for those questions. Yeah, so first, I would say that the African Studies program at the University of Washington is in a really unique situation because of Seattle's enormous African population, right? I'm currently teaching the Modern African History Survey course now at the UW, and I've got a student from Kenya, one from Nigeria, one from Somalia, a couple from Ethiopia, right? And so it's really a joy, right, to have Africans in my courses, because while I believe that everyone should know African history, right? Yeah, it hits differently if I'm, teaching about, you know, um, Haile Selassie, right? Two people who are actually from the Horn of Africa, right? Um, and so I think that one of the things that I would like the African Studies program at the UW to do is to really create a pipeline and to strengthen the connections, right, that the UW has with the local African population, right? We know that there's a huge population, of course, of Ethiopians and of Somalians, right? Um, and so I would really like to kind of make sure that for, you know, people of African descent living in the Puget Sound, that the UW is not seen as this distant, elite, inaccessible institution that is unconcerned with African life, in King County, right? In Pierce County, right? Um, I think that universities across the country, right, have had to grapple with the history and the legacy of exclusion, right, that universities have had with Black peoples, right? That's just an inescapable truth, right? And so, as a person from a marginalized community leading an African studies program, I really want to increase, right, the number of not just African studies majors, right, but also the demographic representation of peoples of African descent who are able to attend UW, whether it is med school, law school, business school, but definitely undergrad, right? I think that um, and I love you, Dub, right? So this is not a kind of callous critique, but I think that it is hugely important, right, that the numbers of African students at the UW reflect, right, the African population in King County, right?
Yeah.
You can't have an institution with the resources of UW and the size of UW and not ask the question, right? Where are the Africans, right? I want to see more Africans on campus, not just around campus, right? I just don't want Africans, rocking a UW shirt. I want Africans with that UW badge just saying, I belong here, right? I go here, right? So that's a really big that to me is a big goal that the UW should have. In terms of programming this year, I'm really excited. We have several speakers lined up for the winter and spring quarters. We have Mar- oops, her name is Marius Kathor. She is a PhD candidate from Yale. She's going to be talking to us, and she's going to be beginning her post as an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin next fall. She'll be speaking to us in March. Professor David Ngong, who is actually from Cameroon. He is a seminary teacher in Alabama. He'll be talking to us in January, and he'll be on campus talking about his new book on Leopold Senghor. Um, we have Robin Davignon, who is an assistant professor from NYU. She's going to be coming to Seattle to talk with us about her new book on gold mining in West Africa. Um, and during Black History Month, I'm really excited. we're going to be hosting a guest lecture with Dr. Benjamin Talton, who is not only a full professor of history at Howard University, of course, the HBCU in Washington, D.C., but is also directing the Moreland Spingarn Research Center, which is arguably the world's largest repository of Africana-related primary sources. And so it'll be really great to hear him talk about, the roles of HBCUs, right? Which are really experiencing a cultural resurgence right now, right? Well, what role or what influence should HBCUs have on African studies moving forward, right? The ivory tower in this country needs both, right? We need PWIs, right? Predominantly white institutions like UW, right? Doing research on Black people. We also need HBCUs, right? Obviously doing the same thing, right? And how can PWIs like UW work with HBCUs, right? Like Howard, to strengthen the study of Africa and Africans in this country as a whole, So those are some of the things that we are working on now. So yeah.
Incredible. I am a subscriber of the UW African Studies program, so I get all the notifications for all the events that are happening there, including the virtual session that you just held recently on November 12th. Do you want to speak to that briefly? How was that? And after you share, I will begin bringing a few guests to contribute as well. Go ahead.
Sure. Yes. So I recently moderated a panel called Empires Strike Back: Football and Colonialism. Obviously, with the World Cup coming up, the world is going to see, in very plain form, right, a lot of Africans playing not just on, Cameroon and Egypt and Senegal, right, but also on France, England, right, Spain, Portugal, right, Belgium, right. And so we are going to have a lot of, viewers saying, how did those teams get so Black? Right? Like, and, how are they Belgian, right? What does Englishness mean, right? If half the team is Black, right? So the panel was really good. We talked about the kind of global reaction that the Cameroon women's football team faced in the last World Cup, when they were arguing some calls, right? We talked about kind of, extremely briefly, the history of soccer and its connections to racism, classism, colonialism, right? And so those are some of the things that we talk about. And before we go on to the next segment, I just want to say that, yes, I admit I will be rooting for the U.S. team, but I will also be rooting for every African squad. So I hope that, this can be the year that an African team, if not the U.S., can go all the way.
I agree 100%. The World Cup is being held in Seattle in 2026,
That's true, yeah.
And in fact, the Minister of Culture for Tanzania is coming to Seattle next week, and part of his interest is because of that,
Wow, okay.
Let me know if you want to be a part of that conversation. I feel that you should be hosting these people.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just so proud of the work you do. And I can't say how much it's an honor to host you in the African Father in America podcast today. For now, I want you to take a few notes. I want to bring in a few contributors who are calling in to join us through Clubhouse. I want to start with Brother Earth in just a second. Before we bring you on, Brother Earth, I want to remind everyone who is watching, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and give this video a thumbs up. If you haven't followed me on actually, my new handle on YouTube is the same as my handle on Clubhouse and Instagram and Twitter at Okelo Javan. And I also just want to recognize a few people here. Shomari has been a very, very incredible supporter of the show for many years now. Thank you for being here. And I also see Devon and Mohammed, and I see Noma Duman has joined us as well, and Ned and Roger joining us from Singapore. Thank you so much. Brother Earth, where are you joining us from today? What are your thoughts on the proverb, and do you have any comments for Dr. Townsend?
Peace and love, family. It's Brother Earth. I'm coming from the North Carolina territory, and another beautiful conversation as always, Simon. And as y'all covered a lot of ground, and there was so much he said was going through my mind. I hate that I wasn't able to sit down and really be able to write down what I wanted to, some of the points that I wanted to make or speak to. But as far as a lot of stuff he said ties together. As far as the bounds of blackness, right? And we're taught that law governs all events. The first two pillars of law are status and jurisdiction. And a lot of time when we accept the status of black, Negro, color, African American, it puts us in a box or a label. And a lot of time when you accept the label black, the labels black and white were created to be at opposite ends of the spectrum. And that's why as a so-called African Americans, it's time that we come out of these colonized mindsets and identify who we are as a people. And another point that he made, I was watching Floyd Mayweather do an interview, and he said that I'm tired of people calling me Black American. I'm just an American. And he said, but when I went to the Olympics, I was just an American. I wasn't a Black American. And see, it's a word game. It's a game that's being played on us that we don't even realize, and we don't necessarily know and understand our power. As Noble Drew Ali said, it's important for us to put the pen in our hand and tell a story. For so long, we allow, whenever war takes place, most of the time the history is kept by the winner of the war. And when the winner of the war keeps the history, oftentimes whatever happened to the losing people is mistold or kind of swept under the rug. And for so long, the people who've been keeping the history have been marginalizing us and slighting us. So that's why what he's doing to, make sure everything is on the up and up and keep, have us in on these conversations and know what's going on, because, again, we are the original natives of civilization. And before I keep just rambling on that, I'm going to speak to the proverb. And what I'll say to the proverb is, rain does not fall on one roof alone. And kind of along the same sense that he said is, when I think of rain, or when most of the time when people say speak of rain, you think or feel it as it being negative, bad luck, or overcast in somebody's life. And what they're saying is, is telling someone that no one life is going to be perfect, regardless of where you are, what you have, your race, creed, religion, or what have you. You're going to have trials and tribulations. And that's what the rain signifies. And I park my plane right there, Brother Earth. Peace and love, family.
Peace and love to you, Brother Earth. I'll continue on quickly here to Lavender. Lavender, how are you? Where are you joining us, and where are you joining us from, and what are your thoughts in regards to the proverb, or any comment to my guest today?
Hi, Simon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Dr. Christopher Townsell, thank you so much for sharing with us. I just wanted to point out that you spoke about your mom earlier, and that reminds me a lot of my mom, the way she'd nurture and encourage us. You feel a certain amount of confidence that you can never get from anybody else, be it money or wealth or status. Um, it's just different. And please let her know she brought up a stand-up human being, and you're an inspiration to many. And my thoughts about today's proverb, or rather, before I jump into that, I'd like to also appreciate Brother Earth. Your sharing was profound. Thank you so much.
Oh,
About today's proverb, rain does not fall on one roof alone. Like Brother said it, rain is usually looked at as something negative, but it could be something positive. It depends on how you decide to look at things. And so, however you look at it, it's never going to rain forever. Seasons change. So, um, sometimes it's usually flooding somewhere else. Sometimes it's misty somewhere else. Sometimes it's just a few drops of rainfall. No matter what, it's gonna come to an end at some point. Thank you so much, Simon. This is Lavender, and I'm done speaking.
excellent. Thank you, Lavender. Let's go quickly to Stella, then we'll go to Brother Rushi and Fred, then come back to our special guest, Dr. Christopher Townsell. Stella, how are you? Where are you joining us? And what are your thoughts in regards to today's conversation?
Hello, Simon. Hello, everyone. This is Stella from Kenya, and I'm glad I managed to join the show today. On today's proverb, which talks about rain does not fall on one roof alone. To me, when I first heard about it, it reminded me of selfishness, and I think that it talked deeply about selfishness. And recently, I read that you can be immaturely selfish or maturely selfish. And I had never thought about selfishness in that way until I read that. And I think in this case, rain is maturely selfish, because if rain were to fall on, let's say, one roof alone, then it would mean that other places would be dry. If you think of rain as something that is going to come with benefits, especially if for a farmer and farmers to say. And in this case, I'm trying to appreciate rain as a good thing, because when it rains, then it means that there's life that is going to come out of it. So that's what I deeply thought about selfishness. And in this case, rain is maturely selfish. Talking about mature selfishness. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. For those meeting Stella and Lavender for the first time, they're part of the One Vibe team. And I really appreciate you all for the incredible work you do. My brother Rushi, how are you? Thank you for joining us again today. Where are you today? And what are your thoughts in regards to the ongoing conversation?
Thanks, Simon. This conversation is great. I am thoroughly enjoying the conversation. I am calling today from Nairobi, Kenya, where where the rain has fallen here actually, because my street is pretty much flooded. So we've gotten some rain last night. Um, well, with this proverb though, this is a very powerful proverb. Rain does not fall on one roof alone. And actually, when I first read this proverb, but then after I heard the guest, it put it in a whole different perspective for me. This actual proverb, because I think when I look at this proverb, the rain, which is water, signifies one of the key elements that we need in our life. Is a very important, very vital to growth. So to me, this proverb speaks about the knowledge that falls upon us that we get to pass on. And with the guest talking about the studies and having the different types of people, the subsets of cultures that resides inside one classroom that you can actually learn from, it's very powerful. Just by me living in Seattle, living in the Columbia City neighborhood, a neighborhood is very dominant Ethiopian, and just being able to walk the streets and being able to learn from the people who I've met, the different stories as to how they ended up in Seattle or why, how long, those are such powerful lessons in life. And those are the things that we all get to embrace, live inside such a diverse community that Seattle has. And it's even going further from that. That's from me growing up on the East Coast of Charleston, South Carolina, and then going to all black school, South Carolina State University, which was HBCU, and being submersed into a totally black culture was another lesson that I hold dear to my actual growth as a person, as an individual. So I think of those lessons when I look at this proverb, and I think this is a perfect proverb for the guest speaker. And I thank you for this time.
Thank you, my brother. I deeply appreciate you for being here despite the rains. Let's go to Fred. Fred, how are you doing today? And what are your thoughts in regards to the proverb or comment on our special guest today?
Greetings, Simon. Greetings to everyone. Greetings to Dr. Christopher also.
Hey, Fred.
From the little I heard,
Fred, this is Simon. Get close to your mic a bit. We want to hear you loud and clear.
oh, sorry about that.
It's okay.
Can you hear?
It's much better now. Carry on.
Oh, okay. All right. I was extending greetings to everyone. I started by doing that, and inclusive with the doctor also. From the little I heard, I came in a little bit late. Your work is instrumental. We should strength and courage as you carry on. The proverb reminds me of the words of Kwame Nkrumah when he fought for the independence of Ghana. When he said that the independence of Ghana is not complete unless tied to the independence of others. Just like the rain that doesn't fall on one roof, the problems and issues that are faced by people in the continent and other places connect humanity as well as our joys and our triumphs. So I'm reminded that being empathetic and sensible in recognizing challenges that other people face is as important as celebrating the wins and their victories. Thank you, Simon, for hosting me the last time, and it's always a pleasure and an honor being part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Fred. I deeply appreciate you too, and I appreciate your support for the show and your contribution today. I want to come back to you, Dr. Christopher Townsend. What did you hear from our friends, our brothers and sisters who contributed that you want to reflect on for a few minutes? And then I also want you to think about how we can support you, how we can support your work at the University of Washington African Studies program, but also how we can support you personally. I'm very, very passionate about supporting leaders like you. So if there's a link where you want us to go and get a copy of your first book, this is a good time to speak about it. If you are on social media and you want everyone who is listening and watching to connect with you, this is also a good time to think about that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And I'll just say that first, I'm blown away by the geographic scope of your listening audience. That is amazing. And so just my props to you for the work that you are doing. I mean, Singapore, Nairobi, North Carolina, and I went to Duke, so I am very familiar with North Carolina. So I was happy to hear that. Yeah, I think that one of the comments that stood out to me was how this proverb connects with the idea of selfishness, which is not something that I initially thought about when reading the proverb, but I do think that yeah, that just got me to thinking, right? If rain, falls on those who are, small and large, right, then, we all have something that we can give, right? It might not be, cash, right? But it could be patience, knowledge, love, wisdom, kindness, right? We all have rain that we can share with other people. So I appreciate that, and so yeah, I'll say, Simon, I would love to have you as a guest speaker. To the program as I try again to strengthen connections between the African Studies program at the UW and the local African community. I think that you have a very unique perspective to share, and I think that people within these big brick buildings here need to know about it, right? We need to dismantle the town and gown divide, and I think really come together and see this as a joint project, right? A joint work. Um, and for those of you who are on social media, my Twitter handle is at CTouncil1. So at CTouncil and then just the number one. And yes, it would be awesome if you are interested in acquiring the book. There are two ways. One, and I made sure that my um, publisher knew this, but the book is publicly available online for free. You can download it. I did not want financial means to be a prohibitive barrier for those who wanted to read the book. But so if you basically Google the title of the book, which is Chosen Peoples, Christianity and Political Imagination in South Sudan. On Google Books, you should be able to, scroll through the whole book. But if you're like me and prefer the, bound physical copy that you can hold in your hand and flip through and bookmark and, mark through it, you can go to the Duke University Press website. And because the African Studies Association meeting is currently being conducted, I believe that there is a code that you can enter. I believe it's ASA 22, and you can get the book for 40% off. So that's just to say that if you want the physical book, you can get that at a decreased cost now on the Duke University Press website. Or if you would rather read through it electronically, you can go to Google Books, type in the name of the book, and you can scroll through it at your leisure.
Wow, incredible, incredible. I'm just grateful to you, Dr. Townsell, and I want to do two things before I let you go. I want to recognize Jay Ware, who is an incredible leader, poet and writer from Seattle, who just joined us for the conversation. Thank you for being here. I also want to give a chance to Norma Duman, who joined us on the stage. Do you want to say something real quick before we end the show?
Hello, everyone. My name is Hidayah, and I'm joining you from Sweden. This made me very happy, and I want to thank everyone for doing this. And it is actually very needed to have Africans telling our own stories and sharing with the world. And this is the first time I've heard about this proverb, and I see rain as something positive. So when something positive happens to one household, it happens to all of us. That is how I have understood. And when a calamity falls upon us, then it falls on all of us. So it is amazing to me to hear the work you are doing. And I can't wait to read that book, actually. I'm going to try to find it tonight.
Oh,
Excellent.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, we are now joined by someone from Sweden, which is incredible. And really, I thank you all, for contributing today from, the Nomad Woman all the way to Lavender, and to all our listeners who didn't have a chance to contribute, and to everyone who is going to watch and listen to the show later on. I deeply appreciate you. And to you, Dr. Townsell, I can't wait for me to come and speak at the University of Washington. As I was saying, I did it once. I had to research. I was a DJ for a long time. And
wow,
so,
okay.
Yeah. So I had to research the relationship between Somali music in the 70s and 80s and Afrobeat and Fela Kuti music, and how the music scene in Africa and the US influenced each other, but particularly the relationship between all the music around the world at that time and what was going on in Somalia. So that was the first time I spoke at the UW African Studies program, and I can't wait for another opportunity. But I just want to commend you and let you know that you have a friend in the African Father in America podcast. So if you have any other speakers coming up, just let us know and we'll host them and help spread the word as much as we can. In fact, we will have a blog that we will write as a result of this podcast episode. We do that with all episodes. So we'll share the blog with you so that you can also share it with your community. But I'm just grateful. Have a nice rest of your day. And I'm sure we will probably see each other next week. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
African Father in America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. African Father in America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. You are listening to African Father in America podcast by Simon Javan Okello, live from Seattle, Washington,